Hi, today I want to discuss a substance that's sold as a supplement, but it's actually was developed as a drug in Russia in the 1960s. It's called Phenibut. Now, you might be wondering right off the bat here, why would I be talking about this kind of obscure drug? And I'll tell you why. It's because it's often mentioned on bodybuilding forums, and apparently a lot of athletes and bodybuilders use it. Okay, what is Phenibut? To understand what Phenibut is, you have to understand a little bit about brain chemistry, neurotransmitters. The primary inhibitory neurotransmitter of the brain is called gamma aminobutyric acid, or GABA. Now, what an inhibitory neurotransmitter does is it slows down neural impulses. In short, it relaxes the brain, it helps you to sleep and that type of thing. As a matter of fact, most hypnotic drugs or drugs prescribed to induce sleep work by interacting with the GABA receptor. Alcohol interacts with a certain GABA receptor, which explains why it produces some of the euphoric effects of alcohol. The particular GABA receptor alcohol interacts with is called GABA receptor A. Now, Phenibut uh, interacts with a different GABA receptor in the brain. It's called GABA receptor B. In Russia, it's used to treat anxiety and alcohol withdrawal, among other things. That's an interesting fact about Phenibut. It's remarkably effective at helping you withdraw from alcohol use. In other words, they can be used to treat alcoholics when they're getting off or withdrawing from alcohol. It'll reduce a lot of the side effects that occur during alcohol withdrawal. And again, this has to do with its interaction with GABA receptors in the brain. Uh, the usual, in fact, Phenibut actually got a little bit of fame years ago when it was disclosed that it was packed in the medical kits of Russian cosmonauts who were going to space. They gave it to the Russian cosmonauts because it lowers levels of anxiety and stress without making them drowsy. So in short, it produces a euphoric effect. And it also reduces social anxiety. For example, people that have trouble communicating in social interactions, they take Phenibut, and it actually makes them more open and, let's say, conducive to conversation. In that respect, Phenibut is similar to another drug called MDMA, better known as ecstasy. However, it works under different mechanisms. Phenibut is a little bit less dangerous than ecstasy as far as producing sudden death. The usual doses prescribed, it's not, I should say that Phenibut, although it's used in Russia, it was never approved for use in the United States, Europe, Australia, or Great Britain. And the reason for this has to do with what they call the pharmacokinetics of the drug. In other words, what the problem with Phenibut, and wait, let me just tell you, let me backtrack a little. Phenibut, what it actually is, it's GABA itself. It's GABA aminobutyric acid, but it has a additional chemical called phenol. A phenol group is added to it. What does this do? Now, you might know that GABA is actually sold in supplement form. In fact, there's been articles on the web and so-called science blogs where they talk about how GABA can stimulate growth hormone, and this is correct. But there's two things to consider about that. First of all, GABA cannot penetrate what they call the protective blood-brain barrier. It's these capillaries in the brain that prevent entry into the brain of certain substances that can cause harm. It's kind of a barrier or a block. It's kind of a wall in the brain made up of blood vessels, the blood-brain barrier. GABA, in its usual form, cannot penetrate the brain barrier. It's made in the brain from other amino acids such as glutamine and others. But if you take a exogenous source, like a supplemental source of GABA, it won't be taken up in the brain in any quantity to do anything. That's the first thing to consider. The second thing to consider is that GABA, remember, I said it's an inhibitory neurotransmitter. It relaxes you. If you take it in large amounts, it makes you sleepy. Recall that sleeping pills work by stimulating the GABA receptor. So why would you want to take some, even if it does stimulate growth hormone, why would you want to take something that can stimulate growth hormone, but at the same time make you want to lie down and fall asleep? You certainly wouldn't want to train if you had a lot of GABA in your brain. you'd be extremely drowsy and you'd want to sleep. Now, they had a substance years ago that was, again, popular among bodybuilders about 30, 35 years ago. It was called GABA hydroxybutyric acid, or GHB. I actually used GHB. GHB interacted also with the same receptor, the GABA A receptor that Phenibut interacts with. GHB, I can tell you, was touted as a great growth hormone releaser, and a couple of studies showed it did do that. However, you have the same problem with GHB that you have with taking something that would push GABA into the brain in large amounts. GHB was a fantastic inducer of sleep, and that's why I used it. I didn't use it to stimulate growth hormone. I tried it out once. I was sent a bottle to try, and I followed the directions exactly, and I noted on the bottle, there was a warning: do not use with any kind of central nervous system depressant like alcohol, benzodiazepine, anything that kind of like lowers the reactions of the central nervous system is very dangerous to take with GHB because it's a cumulative effect. It adds to it. So I did not take it with alcohol or anything like that. But what I did notice is when I took the suggested dose, I think it was about 2 grams, if I remember. It's been many years. You could like time it on your watch. 20 minutes after taking GHB, I fell asleep. Now, I mean, nothing I've ever tried. I've tried many things. I have a little bit of a problem with insomnia myself. I've tried many things over the years to help me sleep. Some of them work fairly good, like melatonin and others, valerian, and there's a couple of other ones, glycine and amino acid. However, the problem with GHB is that while it effectively put you to sleep in about 20 minutes after oral ingestion, it broke down into carbon dioxide and water after 4 hours. So the net effect would be if you took it right before you go to sleep, you'd fall asleep right away. Then 4 hours later, you'd wake up like totally alert, like you just wake up in wherever you are in your bedroom, and it would seem like you never even went to sleep. Of course, what you'd have to do then is take another dose of GHB to sleep another 4 hours, so you get your 8 hours of sleep. And some people didn't like to do that. GHB was actually very safe. They used it in medicine as a pre-sedation for surgery. It was used for many, many years with no problems for that purpose. However, when it got introduced as a supplement, unfortunately, it started becoming abused. The first instances had involved teenagers who had taken GHB and combining it with like 6 packs of beer and that stuff. And you remember what I said earlier, if you combine it with any central nervous system depressant, it's an additive effect. So what happened is a lot of these teenagers went into 24-hour comas. In other words, it actually put them in a coma if they took GHB with alcohol. Luckily, most of them survived. There's been occasional instances in the medical literature where people did die from GHB. But I'm mentioning GHB because it's very similar to Phenibut. But the interesting thing about Phenibut is that it does not have any of the toxic effects of GHB. Nobody, to my knowledge, has died from using Phenibut. Now, after what I've told you, you might say, well, it sounds pretty good. I mean, it reduces social withdrawal. I mean, it reduces social anxiety. It reduces general anxiety. It provides a euphoric effect. In other words, it feels like the best way to describe it, it feels like you drank alcohol and had the kind of good feeling you get when you get a little drunk, but you don't get drunk. In other words, you get the euphoria effect of alcohol without the drunkenness. That's the best way to describe what Phenibut makes you feel like. Now, you might say to me at this point, well, gee, I mean, it sounds like a pretty good stuff. I mean, but here's the problem. This explains, what I'm about to tell you explains why Phenibut was probably, I'm guessing, but this probably explains why Phenibut was never licensed as a drug in the United States, Europe, Britain, and Australia. The reason is that Phenibut, unfortunately, has a very short, well, let me backtrack. When you take oral Phenibut, the effectively lasts for about 15 to 24 hours before it breaks down. That's not the problem. The problem is that continued use of Phenibut and the suggested dosages are 200 milligrams to 2 grams. That's it. You don't want to take any more than that. But the point is, after only 5 days to 2 weeks, a situation known in medicine as tachyphylaxis takes place. What is tachyphylaxis? That means that your body develops a tolerance to the drug and it no longer works. So in as little as 5 days, depending on the dosage, the larger the dosage, the faster your body adapts to it. Within 5 days to 2 weeks, Phenibut in its normal dosages of 2 grams to 200 milligrams to 2 grams, it doesn't do anything. Now here's where the problem comes in. This is the problem with Phenibut. A lot of people enjoy the way they feel on Phenibut. You know, the relaxation effect, the increase of social behavior and all that stuff. How it helps you sleep, blah blah blah. The problem is after it stops working at the usual dosages, a lot of people start to increase the dosage. Some people have taken as much as 30 grams of Phenibut, which is insane. The thing that happens is you can get there's two things that can happen. You can, it's not so much an overdose, but you get like, kind of a reversal. You know, if you take too much, you start to get anxiety, you start to get insomnia, and then there's a withdrawal syndrome if you continue to take large doses that looks exactly like, almost like alcohol withdrawal syndrome. So again, there's a tendency to overdo this stuff. That's the problem with Phenibut. It's not that dangerous a drug, but the fact is it kind of doesn't work after a while. In a short time, after 5 days, 2 weeks, it just doesn't do anything. And there's a tendency to take large amounts. That's going to create a lot of problems. What they do is to treat people who have these withdrawal symptoms of Phenibut, they give them another drug called baclofen. Baclofen was originally developed to treat epilepsy because it's actually it looks almost exactly like Phenibut structurally. It's a little bit different, and in fact, it has much greater affinity for the GABA B receptor than does Phenibut itself. So you only need small dosages. But because baclofen interacts with the GABA B receptors, you can use it to wean somebody off who has, like, let's say, a dependence on Phenibut, and the dosages of 8 to 10 milligrams of baclofen. It's 60 to 100 times greater affinity for the GABA B receptor than does Phenibut itself. So basically, that's about it for Phenibut. Again, this stuff, unfortunately, it would actually be great stuff if it lasted a little longer. And what users recommend, people who have a little bit more logic, they'll tell you to take it a maximum of 2 weeks. If you do decide to take it for 2 weeks and get off for a couple of weeks. And then you could take it again and it'll work. In other words, it shouldn't be taken in the dosages I mentioned, which is 200 milligrams to up to 2 grams. It shouldn't be taken more than 2 weeks. There's one other thing I'll add, which I always mention when I talk about this stuff that's obtained only on the internet. And Phenibut is another one of those substances that you can't get in a drugstore or anything, unless maybe you live in Russia. The only place you can get it is on the internet. It's sold all over the place on the internet. There's, I don't know how many sites. There's dozens of sites selling Phenibut. And the problem with anything you get on the internet remains the same, which is you don't know if you're getting the real stuff. In other words, God knows what could be in the stuff they're selling. I cannot, I don't trust myself. I would never buy stuff like GH secretagogues or Phenibut or any of these kind of unlicensed drugs on the internet, because you never know who's making them, where they're made, whether they come from China, which has very low quality control. The real Phenibut will produce the effects I talked about, but can you guarantee that you're getting the real Phenibut? I don't know. I haven't heard many reports of people who've purchased Phenibut that didn't really notice that it was fake or anything like that. It seemed to be the real stuff. There doesn't seem to be a major problem, but I can't guarantee that. So I personally would not recommend buying it over the internet unless you know it's an absolutely trusted site. So that's about it for Phenibut. If you want information such as this and information on ergogenic aids, hormonal therapy, anti-aging, fat loss research, exercise science, all these subjects are covered in depth every month in my Applied Metabolics newsletter. It's 40 to 50 pages a month, 0 ads. I don't push any supplements on you. I only give you facts and no BS, solid information. And I tell you everything there is to be known about anything I write about. Some of the upcoming things I'm going to be talking about, for example, are I'm going to be discussing who really gets roid rage. That's in an upcoming issue. You know, you've heard of this thing about roid rage, how some guys, when they take anabolic steroids, they flip out and act crazy. Some people say it doesn't exist at all, but I have some evidence to show, which I'm going to discuss, that certain personality types do tend to be adversely affected from a personality standpoint when they use anabolic steroids. I'm going to explain who these people are. Another upcoming article, I'm going to talk about exactly what happens to your muscles when you lay off training. What are the things that happen? I mean, how soon does it take your muscles to come back, your strength to come back when you lay off? I'm going to also have the latest research about whey protein and other supplements. Dozens and dozens of great articles, and you know, this is information you won't find anywhere else except in extremely technical journals. And my writing, as anyone who's a subscriber will attest, is in simple English. I explain all technical terms. So I strongly suggest you subscribe today. www.appliedmetabolics.com. And since I forgot to mention in the last couple of videos, you know, Christmas is probably past by the time you read this, but give yourself a gift. You know, if you really want the best friend you'll ever have in your life, and I mean that, adopt a dog, go to a shelter, adopt a dog. I mean, they are unbelievable. They are so loyal. They literally live for you. I mean, there's no human that could match the I don't care whether you're married or whatever, have a girlfriend, whatever. No human will ever match the loyalty that a dog gives to a human. And I mean that. Take care. See you again.